Welcome everyone to our session on advances in our breakout in advances in global to regional modeling. I'm just going to describe a bit the rules of the game, the process we're going to go through, and give a very brief introduction. I thought Alex and Sonali's introduction actually did a pretty nice job of introducing us to the background and context. So you'll see that I have a couple of the same slides, so I won't need to belabor them. But I'll just finish off with a couple quick comments about some thoughts about economic modeling advances. And then I'll turn to the panelists, and it looks like we can afford about 20 minutes to each of you. And if you want to save a little time for questions and discussion during that 20 minutes, that's fine. If not, that's also fine. And that'll leave us a little bit of time, hopefully 15 or 20 minutes at the end, where we can also see if we'll try to respond to some questions from participants. So feel free to put questions into the chat, and we'll try to keep track of them as we go along as best we can, and see if we can have at least some, use some of those for the discussion at the end. One of the things I thought I would start with is, let's see here if I can, we talked about, actually Sonali and Alex talked a little bit about this AgMIP regional integrated assessment approach. And Lieven Claassen will be talking a little bit more about some of the work we've done with that, and some extensions of that we might do. That's also some of the work that we've been doing over the past year or so in another activity in AgMIP that involves some partners in Africa. And the point I wanted to make just at the outset is to remind ourselves that when we began AgMIP now about 10 years ago, one of the key motivations was this idea that we needed a more protocol-based approach to agricultural system modeling, both so that we could improve the models by, and we really were inspired by the CMIP methodology that had been developed by the global climate modelers. And now, of course, some of the AgMIP teams, like particularly the wheat team, have really made use of that idea of carefully intercomparing models. But the other big motivation for this protocol-based approach is that it allows us to use similar methods across different regions, so that we can, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about in this session. How can we, for example, go from these regional, where in this context we mean subnational typically, think of an agroecological zone or a region in a country where a similar kind of farming system is being used. How can we aggregate that up in a sense, or bring that up to national level analysis, and also then link it to global modeling? You saw this slide in the opening session, so I don't need to belabor it. But what we're going to do in this session, in fact, is touch on each one of these parts by the different speakers. And so I'll just move along. And then Sonali also talked about our CGRA idea, so I don't need to repeat that, I don't think. And let me just finish with this introduction with a few observations from the economic modeling perspective. The more regional to national perspective, Herman Lootskampen is going to talk to us more specifically about the global. As we've started to think more carefully about how we can have national coverage of system-based models, we've begun to confront a number of methodological challenges. And one of those that we realized early on is that if we're modeling farm households as household and production systems, that typically involve multiple production activities and other household activities, that creates a real conceptual gap between models that are typically subnational or national or global that are commodity market based, or at least product market based, or perhaps input markets. And so we've got farms operating at the household level and the farm level, integrating many different things together, inputs, often multiple outputs, but yet the markets setting prices are typically functioning more as separate markets. And that just creates an interesting question of how we bring those two sorts of models together. And it also then, when we do a significant challenge, when we think about, on the one hand, farms as price-taking activities versus market setting prices, farms making technology adoption decisions, for example, input use decisions. How do we jointly arrive at an equilibrium between those two different spatial scales? And so that becomes a really significant modeling challenge that we really haven't addressed very effectively yet, but we need to. And then, of course, we can go one more step to that linkage to global market models as well. So a number of questions then about or implications for data and modeling. How do we represent major farming systems at national scales? How do we deal with the very significant data challenges and data limitations? Also, of course, markets often operate regionally, and so just national characterization markets may not be good enough. We may need subnational or regional market models as well, particularly in some countries where market integration at the national level isn't very effective. And then last but not least, the important question of how we develop our forward-looking, our future-looking pathways and scenarios for modeling. Much of our regional integrated assessment work so far has done this at the subnational, again, at the farming system and sort of subnational regional level. How do we bring that to the national level, link that to national models, and then in terms to the global pathway and scenario concepts that, for example, are being used for climate impact assessment. So just a few opening thoughts from my perspective on some economic modeling issues. And so I'm going to stop sharing now and pass the baton back to Lieven Claassen from IITA, who's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the regional integrated assessment work. So Lieven, you are on.
Hello, thank you, John. Am I supposed to share my screen, or are you putting on my presentation?
That was my plan, even if I didn't explain it very well.
Let's try. Yeah, no, it's fine. Should work.
Yeah, if you can do it, go ahead. Otherwise, I do have your presentation. But yeah, looks like you're good. By the way, sorry, Lieven, let me just add one more thing. I'll go ahead and take some notes and just report back to the main session unless someone else really wants to do it. Any volunteers? Anyone dying to be a rapporteur? Not hearing any volunteers. I guess I'll go ahead and do it. So carry on, Lieven.
Okay, thank you, John. Yes, hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever. For me, it's good evening. There was plenty of sunshine here in Arusha today, but yeah, not anymore. So I'm in the dark, but that's okay. I just hope that my internet connection, stays stable, but because I've been having some problems with it here in Africa. But yeah, I hope it works. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about progress we have made with the regional integrated assessments. And as a matter of introduction, I'm going to repeat a few slides, but in the first place, I want to show you a slide about where these CGRAs are actually embedded in the more general AgMIP community and the AgMIP initiative. And as you see here, this is actually from the AgMIP website. The CGRAs are actually embedded in these interlinked pillars within AgMIP. So they're also connected in this puzzle-like way to this next generation knowledge, data and tools, and also to the modeling of sustainable farming systems. So that's in a way where you can situate also the regional integrated assessments that we're talking about within the broader AgMIP framework. The regional integrated assessments were basically, well, most work, to my knowledge, has been really conducted in a DFID-funded project within AgMIP that was focusing on 7 regions in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And you see here on the maps in this slide where these regions were. And we were really using a multi-model, multi-scale, multidisciplinary and multi-method framework to explore adaptation, mitigation, food policy and food security in the face of an uncertain future. That was the whole principle about these regional integrated assessments. And in the end, of course, that have been mentioned already in several of these slides, it's really, to provide scientifically rigorous information to support improved decision-making by various stakeholders. And also, I call it reiterate with these stakeholders, as you've seen in many slides. So here again, a repetition of the slide that Sonali already showed and John also showed. And so I don't probably need to go back into that again. The important thing here is again, as I was mentioning, that there are several, well, let's say feedback mechanisms and really this idea of co-design, both pathways and adaptations with stakeholders is a very, very important aspect of this methodology. It was also shown in a slightly different way by the slide that Sonali produced, which was based on the Zimbabwe work by Sabine and others. It was basically more or less the same in a different graphic, but the same principles. So going from defining climate risk with multiple models, engage stakeholders, co-design pathways, feedback if necessary, co-design adaptations for the future, and in the end, assess impact. And in this case, there was also, it is usually done with the AgMIP Impact Explorer that was also part of this, research framework. This is a slide also shown already twice, so I don't think I need to go back into that again. So clearly, again, showing the linkages between these regional and multidisciplinary biophysical and economic models and the global also, biophysical and socioeconomic models. So then a little bit towards the more details of our AgMIP regional integrated assessments approach. And we were basically really working with this methodology based on 4 what we call core questions. So in the first place, what we want to do with our models and in these regionals is really test or assess the sensitivity of current agricultural production systems to climate change. So that's really what you see here in these graphs. Question 1 on these, and that's here on the y-axis, yield or value. And you really want to assess the impacts of climate change on these current agricultural production systems. And note, by the way, these 2 graphs are basically saying that, effects can be both negative, but it can also be positive in some cases. So it's not always has to be negative. So that's what these 2 graphs are basically saying. The second core question is then, what are the benefits of adaptation in the current agricultural systems? So we design or co-design adaptation options, and without the impacts of climate change, we try to assess the impacts of these potential adaptation options to the current agricultural system. And in this case, yeah, again, in these graphs, there are many options. So it can be positive, can be even more positive, just to illustrate that in these graphs. Then the third core question is basically, what is the impact of climate change on future agricultural production systems? And that's where our famous REPS methodology is coming in. And for those who are not familiar with REPS, who are not in the AgMIP jargon, these are representative agricultural pathways. And basically later in this session, Roberto is going to have a whole presentation about that. But it's really, well, basically socio-economic scenarios that we also co-developed with stakeholders, and that we try to, well, quantify in our models. And it's basically saying something about socio-economic yeah, parameters in the future. So in this third question, we really yeah, ask ourselves, what is the impact of climate change in the future agricultural production system? And then finally, we also try to assess the benefits of potential adaptation mechanisms in this future world. So these are the four core questions that we have been trying to answer in our regional integrated assessment efforts. So again, another slide to show you a little bit on how all these yeah, multidisciplinary and data are coming together. And you see here the climate data that are driving the crop and livestock models. Again, all linked to these regional economic models. And for that regional economic models, in our current approach, we have been using the TOA-MD approach. I'm not sure whether everybody's familiar with that. Is the trade-off analysis model for multidimensional impact assessment. And then finally, also here, yeah, you see again this clear link with the stakeholder input, and that we really co-designing these potential pathways into the future. A little bit about yeah, the data that we're using for our model inputs, and also the link with these concepts that are used in the climate change world, the RCPs and the SSPs, and how we basically link them also to our REPS, and then both the global REPS and also the regional REPS, which are relevant in our approaches. So again, then here a little bit, yeah, this jargon, representative concentration pathways, so it's basically emission scenarios, shared socioeconomic pathways, representative agriculture pathways again, and the TOA-MD model, which is depicted here. And I don't think I want to go into detail about that. So what I'm now going to show you is a little bit the results of one application of the regional integrated assessments that I'm most familiar with. And it's the work we did in East Africa, and more specifically in Kenya, where we really had a look at maize-based systems. So you could say that's, well, subnational. These are the most important agricultural systems in Kenya, though it's not limited to that alone. But we really focused on these maize-based systems, which cover, well, a large part of, well, I would say the agriculturally productive region of Kenya. So I'm quickly going to, yeah, walk you to some first results. I'm going to be, yeah, quite general, because it was a very complicated and yeah, very intensive analysis that we did there. But I'm just going to try to give you a little bit of an idea on the data we used, and also give you an idea about the general results that we found from our regional integrated assessment. So on the data first, on the economics, and really for the, well, for the TOA-MD model, we really made use of LSMS survey that's from the World Bank, covering about 900 or even about 1,000 households in Kenya in this maize-based system. And to give you an idea a little bit about how we stratified that population, we basically stratified it across high, medium, and low potential. That means for maize growth. And also we stratified between systems that have yes or no dairy in the system. So that gives us 6 strata across these 900 households. So we could also do a little bit of a stratified analysis of potential impacts in all these research questions, in this case, in these strata. For the climate, that's also a whole different, well, a whole unit on its own within AgMIP. We made use of historical weather data from based on 14 actual weather stations. But then with the AgMIP protocols and methodologies, we kind of extrapolated or mapped it to 70 villages or locations that are really, I showed you in this map here, that are basically covering all these agroecological zones where these maize-based systems that we're trying to analyze are located. So in terms of crop modeling, we did have info on crop management. So cultivars, fertilizer use, manure use from the same household survey. And we also had some information from 42, what we would call representative soil profiles. And we all know how tricky that is to work with representative soil profiles. But in this case, on this scale level, there is no other way to do it than with what you have, basically. So again, on the modeling, we used for the economic impacts, we used the TOAMD model. For the climate, we basically selected 5 GCMs representative of different situations that we assigned to the stations based on the AgMIP protocol. And I won't go into detail about that. And we also used 2 emission scenarios, representative concentration pathways, namely 4.5 and 8.5. In terms of crop modeling, we used both the DSET and the APSIM model for maize. And for maize only, I should say, and that's of course also quite a limitation, I would say. We didn't model any other crops. And so the effect on other crops and on livestock is basically, based on assumptions or based on literature, on other, pragmatic methodologies, I would say. In terms of the reps, we developed 2 reps. So we developed also with stakeholders and based on literature and models. We developed 2 reps, and one rep 4, is based on this lower emission scenario, the RCP 4.5, and SSP 1 on the shared socioeconomic pathways. And then the second one, rep 5, as we call it, is based on the higher emission scenario and SSP 3. Just a lot of jargon, but just for your information. Just to give you a very broad idea about how these data look like. So here we have a little example of what these data of the LSMS household survey can look like. So we really have, these are just a few observations. It's not, it's just to give you a snapshot. So we really have some information on household size, or farm income. Of course, in terms of maize, we have a lot of information from this survey on the way maize is grown and what it gives for also on the economic side, and also on the livestock we have quite some information. In this case, the livestock activity that we really concentrated on was really dairy production. So we didn't go. We basically grouped all the other livestock activities together as one activity, just like we did with all the other crops than maize, which again is it's an assumption, but also due to data limitations and methodological limitations, we had to do it that way.
Hey, Levin, sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to
Yeah.
have to ask you to finish up in a few minutes.
Okay. All right, let me do my best. Just a snapshot of one location, what we did with these 5 GCMs. So you see here, we selected cool and wet, cool and dry, a middle scenario, hot and wet, hot and dry. And this is then compared to the baseline. This is a slide, and I'm not going into detail, but what we did with the crop models was also did a lot of sensitivity analysis in order to use these crop models for their purpose. And then I immediately go to the results, very general. So in terms of core question 1, so remember that's the impact of climate change on the current agricultural system. So again, we had a combination of 5 GCMs and 2 RCPs, so that's a lot of simulations for each of those, 900 farms. So that's really a lot of simulations that we did there. But as a general result, across all these scenarios, between 50 and 70% of the households are vulnerable to climate change. So that means decreased farmer net returns, per capita income, and increased poverty rates. So what's also interesting to notice is that households in the high potential area are actually the most vulnerable. And that's basically because they're most dependent on maize for their livelihoods. Then quickly to core question 2. So remember that's the impacts of adaptations on the current agricultural production system. And just to give you an idea, I'm not going to go into details, but we developed, again, with stakeholders and basically interventions based on fertilizer and manure application, and also on dairy development, so improved dairy development. So what we found out from the modeling is that interventions are very beneficial for a large majority of the farms, and that the revenue from yield increases for both crops and livestock, so milk, really outweigh the increased production costs. Just in general, these are some very general conclusions for core question 2. Core question 3 then, so the impacts of climate change on farms in the future, so including our reps. Again, just to mention that these rep elements from the narratives were really quantified in both crop and economic models. And what I want to say here is that, again, an exponential increase in simulations, because we work again with 2 reps on top of the GCMs, the RCPs, and then also we had to do some relative yield assumptions and 2 price scenarios on top of that. So you can imagine the amount of simulations that we had to do. So anyway, across scenarios, 35 to 47% in REP 4 are vulnerable and 32 to 51 in REP 5. A very general conclusion. However, the per capita income increases slightly. So, and that is basically because the impact model from IFPRI really predicts price increases under climate change. And that's why these per capita income, even though households are vulnerable, are slightly increasing. It's really a slight increase, I have to say. And also for other crops than maize, this offsets yield losses. Also, poverty rates decline slightly across scenarios. And again, households in the high potential zone are most vulnerable, because again, they're most dependent on maize. Finally then, and that's the one but last slide, John, so the core question 4, so the impacts of adaptation in the future world under climate change. We basically decided to apply an intervention consistent with core question 2, but really tailored to a world with climate change. And in this case, we were really targeting government plans in Kenya in the context of the East Africa Dairy Development Project. So what we found out there is across the scenarios that we had 75% adoption rates predicted. So that means, quite a good impact in this case of these interventions. And what we generally can conclude is these policy interventions then aimed at increasing the farm's focus on milk production, including the use of improved breeds, have the potential to greatly improve livelihoods in future maize-based systems of Kenya. This is then the final slide up for discussion. So it's basically some of these things that John already mentioned in the introduction. So he was already saying that these farm households are complex systems. We are only able at the moment to simulate a few components. So what do we do, or how do we do it best with all the rest? Also mentioned by John, how to move beyond these maize-based systems, which are to the national level, including other major systems and urban households. Then also, well, I would call it how to hard link these regional assessments with global assessments, including feedbacks. And I know that over the years in AgMIP, we have been discussing that many times in previous AgMIP meetings, but we never really concluded on that. So I just want to bring it up here. Also mentioned by John, subnational markets and prices for agricultural products, labor and purchase inputs. National markets, the issues of migration, urban households, trade policy. And finally, also these national policies, R&D on adaptation, policies on trade and on mitigation, all important to methodologically include in these regional integrated assessments. And with that, I conclude. I hope I didn't go too much over my time, John.
I was harassing
Thank
you a
you very
little
much.
bit in anticipation so that you came out just about right, Levin. Thanks
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
You'll need to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn to Herman Loskampen from the Potsdam Institute, who's going to talk to us about global economics.
Yes, thank you, John. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you. Levin, you're
Okay.
still controlling.
He's not controlling it no more. I just took him off. Who's the next person who's going to present?
That's me.
Herman
Okay.
is, and there we go.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, John. Thanks to everyone. I wanted to say, I mean, originally we planned to be in New York City by now, and I'm really missing going to one of the jazz clubs, which I did when we were there the last time. But on the other hand, I'm really fascinated that we are together in this format here. And I think we should be grateful that we at least have this opportunity to discuss. Well, with this group, so many people we met at these previous meetings. So it's really nice to have this exchange across all those time zones and regions. I mean, even sitting in Arusha where we had an AgMIP workshop once. So this is really, really great. Let me give you a very brief overview on recent advances in the AgMIP Global Economics team. We have about 10 active models at the moment, and the group of people you see here on the first slide, those are actually the kind of the team leaders of 8 of these modeling teams, but a lot of the team members in these different modeling teams are of course also heavily involved in all the work we are doing. So I'm trying to, yes. So for those of you who haven't been involved in this, I just want to start with a few major research questions in our team. So what are the questions we are dealing with? So basically, what's the future of global and regional agricultural prices? How will agricultural production and food consumption evolve in the future? And then a special focus on climate change impacts and how mitigation efforts affect prices, land use change, agricultural trades, and also impacts on undernourishment. And last but not least, what's the role of dietary change in those future scenarios? So linking all the way from the demand side to the primary production side. The models involved, that's important to note because there are kind of strong differences. The models do similar things, but internally they are very different in their structure, and that makes it so important and so interesting to do these systematic model comparisons. So we have 5 so-called partial equilibrium models. So these are models who focus mainly on the agricultural sector, also with more or less biophysical detail in terms of land availability, land quality, and so on. So these are really specialized models on agriculture production, land use change, and related aspects. And then we have 4 CGE models, so general equilibrium models. These are models which basically cover the whole economy, where agriculture is just one sector or several subsectors. And so they are dealing much more with also the interactions between agriculture and other sectors of the economy, like the energy sector and employment issues and so on. And then there's the image model, magnet image. They are kind of cooperating closely. And image is an integrated assessment model, also with a strong agricultural focus. So these are the 10 models currently more or less actively involved in our exercises. And this group has been around for, well, I would say almost 8 years now, I think since 2012. And we have done continuous model comparisons and joint papers. And then we also have a link to the FAO through Lorenzo Bellu, the FAO modeling group here and there, because this work is relevant for FAO, of course, as well. And Marco Springmann, who is a diet and health or nutrition and health expert at Oxford, where we also discussed joint modeling ideas. So let me give you 2 examples from the 2 most recent papers. This one is from Global Environmental Change in 2020. And here the title is, okay, are our scenario projections overly optimistic in terms of yield changes? And here just 2 slides I have on this. The question is the projections on productivity change and yield into the future, and you see here until 2050. We have often discussions with the biophysical modelers whether the economic models are too optimistic, and because of covering technological change and not referring to biophysical limits too much. And so here you see a comparison, first of all, across a couple of the econ models for the SSP2 scenario on average yield increases, you see for all cereals, for wheat, for rice, for coarse grains, at the global average. And we compared those to first like a linear projection of past observations, the blue line, and then also to observations on attainable yields from different sources. These are the black lines. And what we can say in general that, as you see, those projections, well, they differ across the models. They flatten out over time, and in most cases, they actually stay well below the attainable yields and also below the linear projections into the future. Not in all cases, if you see for wheat and rice, but on average. And this is, of course, interesting as a robustness check and also to look into where those different economic models differ in their assessments. And we can also do that at the regional level. So most of these models cover something between 10 to 25, 30 global regions. So we can look at it at OECD countries or also Sub-Saharan Africa or China, as you see these different modeling regions. And here we see for some examples for the OECD countries, for example, that some of the models project yields which actually approach and in some of the estimates exceed data on attainable yields. But for other regions, for example, if you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, the projections still stay well below what is said about attainable yields. And this can, of course, mean 2 different things. One is there's still a lot of opportunities to raise yields, but it's also could also be interpreted in a way that projected yields stay well below attainable yields, and these yield gaps are unlikely to be closed in the near future. So again, I think this opens up quite a nice room for discussion about how realistic are these projections, which are obviously important for the whole food system, and how do these models, the economic models, differ across the whole modeling group. So this was the most recent paper from the group, and it's I think it's a nice example of what can be done with systematic model comparison. And the second example is actually, it's by Elke Stehfest as a lead author in Nature Communications last year. This is about key determinants of global agricultural projections. And this was actually a decomposition analysis where we try to tease out how the models react to different driving parameters. Now I'll come to that in a minute. So first of all, these are the projections of the models on key indicators like global cropland area, pasture area, calorie consumption per capita, and overall crop production. And you see this for the three SSPs, 1, 2, and 3. And here you see quite a spread. Okay, that's a bit overemphasized. If you look at the scale, this is not starting from 0. But again, here we can tease out where specific, it's like a benchmarking exercise where specific models are at the lower end, the higher end, or in the middle. This also helps to position each model within the ensemble, and also try to tease out why some models react as they do and how they compare to others. So for some aspects like cropland area and SSP1, you see the models are quite close. For others, pasture areas, for example, there's a wider difference, which may not be so surprising because there's also quite a bit of uncertainty and difference in coverage of pasture areas. But again, this is quite useful to understand where the differences are across these models. And then what Elke and we as a team did, we tried to tease out, okay, how do the models react to different drivers? And the drivers you see on the left-hand side. So the drivers are the aspects which actually characterize the different SSPs. So it's the income per capita measured in GDP per capita. It's the population change. It's changes in consumption preferences. It's PRD, that's productivity change, so yield increase, technical change. Land use restrictions, that's land use protection, and also trade. And I'm not going into details here, but it's just to show that the model, and then we switched on and off these different drivers while moving from SSP2, like the middle of the road scenario, to either SSP1 or SSP3. So we switched on and off each of these drivers one by one, so that we could look at each individual effect, which is the medium shaded element here. Then we also determined what's the contribution of this switch in the overall effect, and what's the interaction between the two. And you can see that, for example, changes in consumption preferences do react, or the models do react quite differently to these. The reaction to income change is rather similar. So this is really another specific example how to systematically compare those models and really try to understand how the dynamics of these models work, and what drives the results in the end. So again, a very interesting exercise for benchmarking the models for readers and the outside world, but also an important learning experience from the modeling teams among themselves. Okay, so this was the two most recent papers. I wanted to say that I would ask you not to visit immediately the Global Economics team website on the overall AgMIP website, because that's actually hopefully outdated. I'm trying to update that, so you will not find those two papers there. But I'll try to do that soon so that you see the complete list of papers. To end this, I want now to turn to our current activities, and we are currently preparing or working on 6 exercises initially targeted towards the IPCC AR6 submission deadlines. Now, the AR6 process is delayed due to the pandemic. Our work is also delayed due to the pandemic. We have to see how it turns out in the end. Maybe some of these papers will make it into the submission or before the submission deadline. So the first aspect is a systematic comparison of diet change projections led by Elke, where we implement ambitious diet change and see how the different models react in the future. This is of course important, related to the Eat Lancet report and so on, given that the diet change has a huge leverage on all kinds of indicators of the agricultural system. Then Ignacio Perez is leading a paper on impacts of extreme events on agricultural prices. This is, I think, the first exercise in our group to focus on extremes. We are still not quite there on the full results, and it's a limited exercise, or limited in scope of coverage of crop model and GCM results, but it's a first step at that. So that's in the making. We are also trying to integrate multiple climate impacts on agriculture. We are starting to link crop yield shocks with livestock productivity shocks and labor productivity shocks. This has been asked for quite a while. We are just collecting the input data, which is a bit of a challenge, but this is in preparation. Shinichiro Fujimori is leading a paper on the impacts of deep decarbonization scenarios on agriculture and food, so an extension of previous mitigation efforts. And then there are 2 more papers, one on livestock production, a systematic comparison across the SSPs, which we haven't done before, and a special paper on methane emissions. There is this discussion about the global warming potential metric, GWP star, a new metric related to short-lived greenhouse gases, and this would have effects on agriculture and mitigation efforts. And there's also a paper in the making on this. And these paper ideas, to end my talk, open up quite a few opportunities for exchange with the other AgMIP teams, of course with the crop modelers, also with the livestock modelers. Yeah, I think that's the main interaction. I haven't said anything about the global to regional interactions. Frankly, we haven't made too much progress there. I mean, there's some linkage through the impact model, which is one model in the team here. I think we could do more on that, but I think we still haven't solved this issue of the interface between, well, subnational regions, country level, and then those global modeling regions. But yeah, it's still on our minds, and we can still try to improve on that in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Herman. That was really a nice summary of what the global econ modeling team has been doing and what you're working on. You guys have always been busy, and it's great to see. We're going to pass the baton now to Christoph Müller, also from the Potsdam Institute, who's going to tell us about the very active, I think, crop modeling group, global crop modeling group, and I guess Christoph also a few words on carbon as well.
I'm not sure if you can hear me already.
Ah, there we go. We hear you. At least I do.
Okay, great. It's always a weird process, but
yep.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm asked to update you on the global agricultural modeling activities. So basically on the what we call GGCMI, so the Global Gridded Crop Model Intercomparison. And I'm presenting our current activities, which I'm co-leading together with Jonas. But of course, we are nothing without the team. But that's too large to list here, so I'm not boring you with that. For those who haven't heard of GGCMI before, so basically AgMIP and AgMIP met like some 8 years ago. And because AgMIP didn't have a global scale back then, and AgMIP only had a global scale and wanted to have agriculture as one of the sectors, GGCMI was formed basically as an activity in AgMIP then. And well, we have finished this fast track activity that was this AgMIP attempt to serve the AR5 report of the IPCC, and now we are in another fast track activity, as Hermann already pointed out, to meet the submission cutoff dates of the AR6. But in between, we had like what we call a phase 1, which was a historic period assessment, basically serving the evaluation purpose. And then we had a phase 2, which I will be talking about, and that has been finalized so that models have contributed their data, but the analysis and everything that can be done with this has not been finalized. So I will talk about that a little bit also, because I think this is a great entry point for other groups to work with our results. And then the phase 3 is basically a redo of the fast track. So a CMIP6 based future projections. We have a much larger group of crop modeling, crop model groups that indicated interest. So far we have 7 contributions. So basically we are on par with the original fast track, but I will show you that in a minute. So this phase 2 activity that also has a nice acronym. It's CTWNA experiment. So C is carbon dioxide, T temperature, W water, and nitrogen, A is adaptation. So we had basically what you would call an input sensitivity study. So we have regular disturbances of an observed climate data set. So the 31-year AgMIP weather data set was then disturbed with like 1 degree warming. So every day, every grid cell was 1 degree warmer, up to 6 degrees warming. Water supply, we did that in relative changes, 3 different levels of nitrogen, 4 levels of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, and basically 1 redo of this 4-dimensional cube with an assumption of growing season adaptation. Just one simple assumption that the growing season that shortens under warming is regained by using new cultivars that basically grow exactly the same time as the original undisturbed data set would do. That's fully described in a paper, and you can imagine that this is a huge data set. So we basically have 1,400 variants per crop model per crop of a 31-year global gridded crop simulation. So you can imagine 50,000 pixels more or less that are relevant for agriculture, 31 years. And then we have 12 different models that contribute to that. And 9 of those contributed enough that we could use this sparsely populated cube or fully populated cube to build emulators on them. And the emulators look like, as you see on the left side, that looks like a long equation, but it's like super simplistic because it's basically just a polynomial regression with like the up to the 3rd order. including all cross terms, and then you can eliminate some of these so that that you can have emulators that need less parameters and still provide a good fit for most of the models. You see the cubic n term is crossed out because we only have 3 samples on that dimension, and then you can't really fit a nonlinear or a cubic line to it. And so we did this emulator separately for the adapted and the non-adapted simulation set. We also do the same emulation for irrigation water demand. So in principle, within this training domain, from -1 to +6 degrees warming, from -50% to up to 30% increase in precipitation, you can, and then the CO2 range and different nitrogen levels, you can basically emulate any crop yield response for 5 different crops, for 9 different crop models, and this emulator really runs on your laptop computer, so you don't need really a big computer to run this. So this is super lightweight and super flexible because you are not dependent anymore on that there's a bias corrected climate projection somewhere that you can work with, because these all work with just changes in temperature and changes in precipitation, and therefore you can skip this bias correction part when using them. So that's also what we did, and that's one of these famous papers that hope to make it before the IPCC cutoff deadline on November 1st. So basically we took the entire AgMIP5 archive and the entire AgMIP6 archive, meaning 45 climate models in the AgMIP5 case and 33 climate models in the AgMIP6 case. And so we have then future projections of how crop yields are going to change for the different crops, for the different crop models, and so on. So, and then we use that to try to understand where are the major uncertainties located. And here you see basically just a split between climate model induced uncertainty, that's the blue part, and the crop model induced uncertainty, which is the green part. And the lines show you that this analysis is not super robust because it strongly depends on the selection of your ensemble. If you take out one of these 9 crop models, you get a different result indicating lines. Whereas this, at least in the AgMIP5 case, is pretty robust. If you take out an equivalent share of crop models, then the picture doesn't change. So the crop models are sufficiently different to each other that the ensemble size determines the output that you would get. And what you see is that in the AgMIP6 case, the climate model uncertainty share increases dramatically compared to the AgMIP5 case. And that is not only because presumably AgMIP6 includes a few substantially warmer models than AgMIP5, but it's also because apparently some of the data is quite wonky and we still need to kind of sort out models and have unrealistic data jumps in their time series. So take this with a grain of salt. This is still work in progress, but that's just to kind of demonstrate where we're going to. To phase 3. So again, this is like a very first collection of results. You see that, or what you see is basically for the 4 different major crops that we've been looking at mostly. You see a green and a yellow box, and the green box is the RCP 2.6 and the yellow box is RCP 8.5. And next to these, there's always a small gray box, which is the original results from the fast track in 2014, published in the Rosenzweig et al. Paper in PNAS. And then each of these boxes, like the thick black horizontal line, is the mean projection across the 5 GCMs provided by AgMIP and the 6 crop models that we have for maize and wheat, and soybean and rice. We currently only have 5. And you see that the impacts become more negative if you move from RCP 2.6 to 8.5, which is like comforting. and you see a dashed line and a solid line. And the dashed line is basically the uncertainty across the climate models. So if you average all crop models for one climate model and then compare across those results, you get this dashed line as a range of impacts. And the solid line is basically the same for the crop models. So if you average for each crop model across the climate models, you get different responses. So what you can see is that in the RCP 2.6, the uncertainty from the climate models to the crop models is more or less on par. And for the higher forcing scenarios, the uncertainty from crop models is larger than that from climate models. What you can also guess, because it's not that easy to see, is that the uncertainty from crop models substantially decreased compared to the fast track in 2014. So the black extent of the black line needs to be compared to the extent of this gray line here. And note that for wheat, soybean, and rice, these have been cut, and they would extend much further up. So that is good. Also, the new projections are substantially more negative than in the 2014's publication, where you see basically here shown in the tan box, the mean impacts across the ensemble was always positive, whereas currently the mean impacts are always negative. But oops, there should be there should be now a big bar showing up on this saying preliminary, because this is preliminary, because of these 6 models that have contributed data, 3 are completely new to us, so we haven't had them in our ensemble before. Those that were responsible for these big outlier responses in the old data set have not yet contributed. So this may indeed change quite a bit once we have more models delivering data, but this is basically just to give you an idea of where we're going to. I was also asked to describe how to get involved. So as all AgMIP activities, it's always open to everyone. If you have a model and a computer, you can run it and submit data. We provide all the input data that you would require to follow the protocol descriptions. But of course, running a global crop model requires quite some computation power and also some expertise or experience in managing large data sets. What you can also do is come up with research questions and side activities that would build on these core scenarios that we've already described, and propose a research study to the group. And experience shows that people are quite willing to run the model again with a slight variant or a larger variant of what they already did, if someone has a real interest in making a publication and an analysis with those extra simulations. What you can also do is request data. So for the previous rounds, all data has been published in public archives, so you can just grab it from there. You can also ask to have access to the most recent data if you want to work with those, understandably. And we are very much open to support you in that and discuss your ideas and the analysis. Global simulations can be considered as like a big set of combined regional simulations if you want, but that hypothesis needs still to be tested. We had several attempts where groups from specific regions wanted to compare their regional understanding of how climate change impacts crop yields, and they took some of our data, but then all these activities faded somehow. But I think that would be like a super interesting bridge to cross in this global regional interaction, to just have like a first comparison of how different are regional assessments from global assessments, and then as a second step try to understand why that is. Could that be specific regional management options that are not considered in the global data sets? Is that because the regional models are trained or better calibrated or better built to serve the regional conditions, or what is going on that needs attention to improve on that. And then the last point I'm listing here, and that's why I have these figures here, is basically what we are heavily dependent on is data, especially on men. And we have here what you see, just an example. We have developed a new global set of growing seasons that is basically stitched together from different data sources, which you can see on the very right-hand side. So there are a few global products, and they contradict each other, and then there are specific regional projects and specific crop projects, like the Rice Atlas, for example, that provide additional information. And then we developed a rule basically to how to select the most likely from these contradicting growing seasons, and what to provide then to the global crop models as an input data set on growing seasons. But I always try to highlight this, and we need to have a platform for organizing this. There are so many regional teams in AgMIP, and they certainly know much better, and you see that data is pretty uniform for large areas, like all of Russia has the same sowing and harvest date, which is likely not true. And yeah, and that's true for many of the countries. So if we would find a way of how regional experts could just provide feedback on these global data sets, and it's not just on growing seasons, it's on management type, on a fertilizer type, fertilizer application times, fertilizer amounts, manure, irrigation systems, irrigation amounts, there's tillage systems, you name it. So there's a lot of information that we are lacking and need to basically supplement with wonky assumptions. And of course, reference data. Also reference data, the main reference data set for the global activities usually is national statistics, as at Eurostat. But often that is not doing justice to the gradients within countries. And it would be really good if AgMIP could become an activity where the regional expertise on any of these aspects of production systems could be collected, and basically build a Frankenstein type of reference data set and input data sets. Oh, yeah, I was also asked to cover the CO2 discussion a little bit, because one of the speakers had to drop off from the panel. So in earlier times, you have often seen that two maps are presented next to each other. Here they are blue and red, but they can also be green and brown, or like basically more or less showing the opposite of each other. One assuming that CO2 fertilization, or one where crop models considered CO2 fertilization, and one where crop models did not. And then the reader or the policymaker was left to make a decision on what to believe. And that is not a good practice, because one of these maps is plausible and the other one is not plausible. And the one that's not plausible is a no CO2 case. So there's no evidence whatsoever that CO2 has no positive effect on crop yields. In fact, there's quite some evidence that they do have quite some sizable effect on crop yields. And there are still quite some uncertainties also at the experimental level. And there are large discrepancies across models with how important this, or how strongly this CO2 response plays out. But extending the uncertainty range to there's no CO2 effect is basically increasing it into the not plausible range, and we should avoid that. So the comparison with and without CO2 fertilization only serves an academic purpose, and that is quantifying the size of this effect. It is not, these are not equally plausible scenarios, and people should be very aware of that when they use that. So we have a publication under review led by Andrea Toretti that tries to collect all the evidence from experimental sites and also highlight gaps in this. And here this map, for example, shows the sites and the different crops indicated by different colors or crop groups across the world where these phase experiments, the free air carbon dioxide enrichment experiments, are conducted. And you see in Africa there's not a single one. So there are large regions, and on the right-hand panel shows basically the cropland sorted via mean annual temperature and annual precipitation. And the strength of the gray indicates how much of the global cropland is in that combination of temperature and precipitation. And then the colored dots are again the phase sites, and you see that quite some large areas of temperature and precipitation combinations are not covered with these experiments. That is because these experiments are super expensive, so it's difficult to run them. But it also means we depend on our understanding of what the CO2 effect does on models. And this is just from Bruce Kimball, basically a review of the reported CO2 effect on crop yields for different crops. And this is at 200 ppm increase from ambient to elevated, more or less. You see there's also in observations, there are some error bars, but except for very few cases where in this case nitrogen is limiting and C4 crops, there's basically no case where CO2 has no effect. You may wonder why cassava has more than 100% increase here, but I think that is actually grown somewhere in North America where it actually does not really grow very well. And then just to show you how this translates into these global models. So here you see the CO2 response, basically making a ratio of these two simulations with static CO2 and with dynamic CO2. And you see this is for wheat. You see that there are quite some different responses, basically from just 10% increase to going up to 100% increases. This is not at 200 ppm, so this is not directly comparable to the right-hand side, but this is at the end of the 21st century and it's RCP 8.5. So we have here an increase of 500, 550 ppm compared to current conditions. And the challenge is basically to build trust in these extrapolations into concentration levels that have hardly been assessed or not assessed at all in phase experiments and hardly assessed in laboratory setups. All the co-limitations with temperature, nitrogen, precipitation, different soils have not been well covered, as you saw in these plots before. But of course, all that contributes to how the global response in this global model reacts. Ignore these spikes at the very end. That's just a processing issue. That's not real data effects. Yeah, so that will remain a major challenge in the global crop modeling to basically get a better grip on the CO2 fertilization. I just want to re-stress that Toretti message that stop doing or stop presenting with and without CO2 as equally plausible results in presentations, because that heavily confuses stakeholders and it is not good practice. Okay, so future activities, as you may have guessed from what I've said so far, so there's lots of opportunities, and some of you may remember this figure with the flies and the spiderweb from the talk I gave in the last AgMIP8 global workshop in Costa Rica. And yeah, we have these established links with the Global Economics Group and the CGI in AgMIP. Also, we serve the IPCC stakeholders through basically the AgMIP protocol and the classical activity of doing climate change impact assessments. But there are so many more activities that we could address and where we already have data that no one ever really looked into, because the modelers themselves are, well, they use the resources to run the models and to develop them, but a lot more analysis could be done with the data that's already there on the role of management, adaptation, interannual variability, variability in space, nutrition aspects, water limitation aspects, biogeochemistry, greenhouse gas emissions. All that could be an entry point for collaboration with the global critical crop modeling. And of course, all of these analysis will help to improve model understanding, and then from there to improve the models further to really reduce the uncertainty range that is, let's say, unnecessary, because it comes from lack of understanding and lack of data. There will be some uncertainty always, because we can't clarify everything, but I think we can move beyond this broad range of crop model responses if we can conduct a lot of analysis with the existing data sets that are there and learn from that. And with that, I think I'm at the end. Yeah.
Great, Christoph. Thank you. Yeah, that was a very nice presentation, and thanks for that summary at the end of all the opportunities for going forward and making connections. I think that's one of our main themes that if we had more time to discuss at the end, we could pick up on. So we'll see how we do. But I'm going to pass it now to Roberto Valdivia, also from Oregon State University, who is going to talk to us, finish up the session on RAPs and scenarios.
All right. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? I think those are the two mandatory questions on online webinars now.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to give a brief update about the development of the representative agricultural pathways, or RAPs as we know them, what we have been doing and what are our plans into the future. But before that, for those who are not familiar with RAPs, RAPs are combinations of economic, technology, and policy scenarios that represent plausible future conditions. So RAPs can provide researchers and stakeholders with a range of possible scenarios that can be used to assess possible outcomes in a consistent way. RAPs include policy and institutional drivers, agricultural technology trends, price trends, and other drivers that can shape future conditions of the agricultural sector. These RAP narratives provide a framework in which qualitative and quantitative information can be translated into model parameters. And as John and Lieven already mentioned, RAPs are a key component of the AgMIP regional integrated assessment approach that we have been using and implementing in several countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So we follow a similar approach of the SSPs to create a matrix of representative pathways. And then we develop specific RAPs by linking SSPs and RCPs and have different sets of scenarios. What we follow what we call an umbrella approach, in which higher level pathways influence the lower level pathways, but making sure there's consistency across these scales. Initially in AgMIP, we focus on developing RAPs at what we call the regional or subnational level RAPs. So that's what we call regional RAPs. And now we are in the process of developing the national level RAPs. And the main objectives of these national level RAPs are, first of all, to support national policies in driving local implementation in a consistent way. In particular, policies related to climate change. which means linking national RAPs back to the regional or local RAPs, and so we can implement those in our regional integrated assessment approach. The second objective is to support the countries in their development of their national adaptation plans or other climate change programs they are developing by providing science-based evidence of the possible impacts of climate change or impacts of the policy and technological interventions or like adaptation strategies, for example. And then our longer term goal is to be able to influence policy decision making in the context of climate change and sustainable development. So right now, with the funds of IDRC and DFID, we have this activity called AgMIP8. And the main goal is co-develop with the stakeholders national representative agricultural pathways. And we're doing this in 3 countries, in Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Senegal. So just to recap what we had so far, in previous phases of this project funded with DFID, phases 1 and 2 of AgMIP that we implemented in Africa and South Asia, we develop site-specific or subnational level RAPs in multiple countries. We had 3 scenarios: the business as usual, a sustainable development pathway, and a pathway that is more like a high economic growth with less consideration of sustainable agricultural sustainable policies. Then in the last phase of this AgMIP DFID project, we start developing the protocols to develop national level RAPs, and we did that for India and Zimbabwe. So now, in terms of national RAPs, so we have the India case. Right now, we are updating the Zimbabwe national RAPs under this AgMIP8 project, and then we are developing national RAPs for Senegal and Ghana. So these are our current activities under this AgMIP8 project. So this figure shows the process of developing both national and regional RAPs and the linkages across the different scales, global, national, and subnational, linking from the SSPs to the national RAPs and the subnational RAPs. I'm not going to go in detail in this figure and these all boxes and rows, but a couple things to highlight is that at national level, the core of these RAPs are the policies. So policy drivers is what really shape the national level RAPs. And at the subnational level, RAPs is those drivers that can affect the farming systems, like changes in farm size, household size, or fertilizer use, and so on, which, when they are quantified, can be inputs to our crop livestock economic models. The other aspect that is new to the way that we've been developing RAPs is including, we're looking more carefully at the climate policies in the countries. So we are taking this concept of the shared climate policy assumptions, which is similar to the SSPs. I don't think there are not really SPAs at the global level, but we are looking at the national climate policies and how they influence, for example, strategies for adaptation, how important are if these climate policies can be implemented or not. Let's see, this is an example of RAPs that we've been developing. This is the case of Zimbabwe, where we developed these 3 RAPs. Here we have the narrative of the 2 contrasting RAPs. One is what they call Green Zimbabwe, which is a combination of RCP 4.5 and SSP1, where the national policies are more oriented towards agricultural sustainability. And the other RAP, which is called Gray Zimbabwe, which combine RCP 8.5 and SSP3, that represents future conditions with more challenges for sustainability. And And this table shows a comparison of the different drivers at the policy, institutional, socioeconomic, technology, and biophysical. The green arrows shows those cases where the direction of change of the drivers are similar, but the magnitudes could be different. And the red arrows shows where the drivers have completely different direction of change. Oops. This is an example of the kinds of drivers that we include in the RAPs. And again, just to highlight that we work this with a multidisciplinary team and with the stakeholders. So for the way forward, as John mentioned before, we're in the process of developing these national integrated assessments. So RAPs, it's a key component. We would like to link these RAPs to national economic models. For example, use RAP elements like agricultural policies as inputs to these national models, and also use outputs from these national models like price trends to quantify these RAPs. The second aspect is to continue working with stakeholders with the main goal of supporting policy decision making. Within our work, we found that RAPs can be really helpful for stakeholders and decision makers in setting priorities for investment and priorities for research and development. And then, of course, we would like to continue developing more RAPs. Hopefully we'll be able to develop national RAPs in the countries where we already have regional RAPs. But also we would like to incorporate new countries and other regions that we are not covering right now. So I think that's all. And of course, this is the other way that we can look at what is the future conditions of the countries. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. Very nice job and fast. So you actually...
I was told less than 8 minutes.
So that worked out very nicely. It saved us. We have, let's say, about 10 minutes left, because I think we'll all probably need a little bit of time to transition back to the main session.
Right.
And also maybe I will need a little time to collect my thoughts about how to report back. I've noticed that during the session, there have been some exchanges through the chat. So that's great. And so I think some discussions and questions and answers have been addressed along the way there. So at the moment, I'm not really seeing any outstanding questions there. Well, and I would invite Christophe and Lieven, if you guys want to put yourselves back in the video, you can do that. Or you can just, listen, have your audio on. But yeah.
The host stopped my video, so I can't turn it back on.
Ah. Don't blame me.
No.
Maybe somebody's monitoring. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, okay. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So actually, Tom Hertel did have a question earlier on, and he was raising a question specifically to Lieven, and maybe to me as well, about the work we did in Kenya and how we really constructed the adaptations that we tested. And he was referring to this question of is it really an adaptation, or is it just a good technology that could be used? And one answer to that question, Tom, is that that's actually a long discussion that we've had among AgMIP for a number of years, and particularly early on in the development of our RAA methodology. This was an ongoing discussion we had, and I have seen David's paper as well. Other people can respond as well, but I guess where I come out on this question is that adaptations are in the eye of the beholder. We can conceptualize a lot of different technology scenarios that we can test with the models under varying conditions, and of course, some system changes could be motivated by climate adaptation, and some will simply evolve as they naturally would. We can probably sort some out and say these would make more sense as true climate adaptations, but take, for example, drought-tolerant crop varieties. I think people were interested in those before or independently of climate change, but we could very well argue that they're a climate adaptation. So to me, I don't really see the issue there. I mean, the way I like to look at it is that what we're trying to do with the modeling is to evaluate how various types of system changes would perform under a plausible set of future conditions. So, whether we call it a climate adaptation or not is just a semantic issue as far as I'm concerned. But I'm interested, Tom, if you have a thought about that.
Well, we explored this empirically in the meta-analysis that led by Fran Moore, using the IPCC AR5 results for the four main staples. And we found consistently that the adaptations, so individuals reporting their climate impacts said there was adaptation or no adaptation. And we found consistently that these were, rather than interacting with temperature in any way, they were just pure shifts, upward shifts in the yield function. So in that sense, it confirmed David's hypothesis about adaptation illusions. These are things that'd be good to do now. There's no reason to wait for climate change to do them. So anyway, that was the thought.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the only other thing I'll say is that in the way we're doing the modeling, to the extent that the models, for example, in our case, crops and livestock, the two main components, like in this particular Kenya case, the crop adaptations were incorporating the actual climate, future climate projections, plus the changes in management. In the case of the livestock, they were not in the particular Kenya case. In the Zimbabwe team case, they actually had a livestock model. However, the livestock models actually don't incorporate climate factors. They really are just driven by feed changes. So it really highlights some of the modeling issues. So I mean, I think you make a good point, and David Lobel makes a reasonable point that we don't want to just impose arbitrary changes and say, oh, here's an adaptation. So thanks for that. Let's see. I think Alex had a question. Alex Ruane, how can we balance the application of scenarios with the utility of storylines? I guess that's a question for Roberto. But I think the other modelers might want to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, I was just typing that answer on the chat as well. Yeah, I mean, building these storylines, we can have infinite number of scenarios, right? And I think that's why, for example, the SSPs, they constructed this matrix of 5 possible scenarios just to limit the number of applications that they can use based on the challenges for adaptation and challenges for mitigation. In our case, we follow kind of the similar approach, trying to cover a plausible range of scenarios over specific conditions. In our case, it's more about looking at the trade-offs between biophysical or sustainability, if you want to call it agricultural sustainability, and economic growth.
John, maybe I can elaborate just briefly on that.
Yeah.
So what Roberto just said is correct, but I was trying to get to one step further, which is now that we have global gridded projections and we have global price projections, there's an opportunity to kind of draw from those instances of some event happening. So for example, what if we built a storyline around a 2070s drought event and kind of try to figure out what would happen there? So it's kind of a question of, you know, even if we go far out into the future, we know there will be shorter term shocks and kind of storylines around specific acute challenges that it's almost like a circle back to the scenario process by looking at the outputs of the models. So this is, it's just an area that is increasingly being considered in other domains. And I'm wondering if you've thought about it here.
A quick response, Alex. Yeah, if I'm following what you're saying, one of the things that has bothered me about the SSPs, for example, is the fact that it's this trajectory out into the future without feedbacks and sort of adjustments of that trajectory. So I do think that's something we need to do differently. It's almost like we need to iterate between the pathways and the modeling, in a sense, dynamically. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah,
more to do there.
It's an ongoing challenge with this kind of long-term projection type modeling, I would say. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know, Herman or Christoph, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question. Maybe the day has been too long. It's getting late here. I need more explanation on that.
Well, I'll let you off the hook there. We're almost out of time, but Christoph, any reaction from you?
Well, I was, if Christoph doesn't have anything to say, I could jump in for a quick comment.
His image was frozen on my computer, so I don't know if that's an internet problem.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Roberto. Yeah.
Okay. Alex, so what you're saying, we are also thinking about, in terms of the reps, how to deal with shocks and having this example of COVID-19. Right, when we develop these reps into the future and we follow, for example, the policies that the governments are doing in terms of sustainable development, follow with that trajectory. But then, yeah, the question is, what happens if there is a shock? How does those trajectories will change? And this COVID-19 it's a good example, and that's something that we are trying to think how we can develop reps that capture those events, and what would the end place, let's say, the end future, if there is a recovery mode to get to the previous pathway, or we end up on a completely different future scenario.
Great. Yeah, Herman, go ahead.
Yeah, I just see Tom's question in the chat on labor productivity.
Yes.
We're currently getting into that. So we are getting first data sets on labor productivity change, basically heat stress to labor productivity. I see some challenges. We are discussing this right now, how to translate that information into, well, changes in agricultural production, or, you know, is it labor hours or is it labor costs? How does that in the end affect agricultural production? That doesn't seem so straightforward to me. So I guess we are starting with something very simple, but yeah, so we are getting at that. This was this example on multiple impacts. We would also love to have livestock productivity impact similarly, like heat stress on livestock productivity. So Jerry Nelson promised us some data from Phil Thornton. Once we have those, we could actually combine those, but actually I still see some translation issues there, but it's an interesting aspect we are closely getting at.
Yeah, yeah, great point, and important issue, I think, that has been ignored too much until now. Well, I think we probably should draw things to a close, so we have a few seconds for everybody to jump back. Just as a reminder, and I hope I get this correct, I think we all have to now sign out of this session and essentially click on that link for the main session again. And we will then have our report backs and stuff. But just a final thought. Or Carolyn, did you want to jump in there?
No, I was just going to say that just use the link on your program. I don't know for sure it's the same one or not, but anyway, I have a few slides for you also, John.
Oh, wow. I've been taking notes too. Great. Thanks, everybody. See you back in the main session.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
All
John.
right. See you in a minute.